Today, you'll discover the incredible story of Samuel, a man who was born into slavery, but whose courage and compassion would transform not only his own destiny, but the life of the woman who would become his wife. Get ready for a narrative, full of emotion, unexpected twists, and a love that defied all the social conventions of its time. Before we begin this amazing story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. The year was 1857, and the morning mist hung heavy over Magnolia Grove Plantation in rural Georgia. Samuel wiped the sweat from his brow as he loaded another bale of cotton onto the wagon, his calloused hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had known no other life. At 25 years old, he was considered valuable property by Master Jonathan Whitmore, strong, intelligent, and surprisingly literate, though he kept that last detail carefully hidden from everyone on the plantation. Samuel had learned to read in secret, taught by the previous overseer's wife, Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who had taken pity on him as a child. She had been a kind woman from Boston who couldn't bear to see young minds wasted, regardless of their skin color. During the long winter evenings, when her husband was away on business, she would sneak Samuel into the overseer's quarters and teach him letters, numbers, and eventually whole books. She had made him promise never to reveal this knowledge, warning him that educated slaves were seen as dangerous threats to the established order. So he kept his intelligence masked behind a facade of simple obedience, all while observing everything around him with sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. The Whitmore plantation was one of the largest in the county, sprawling across 3,000 acres of fertile land that stretched from the Chattahoochee River to the rolling hills beyond. Master Whitmore was known for his stern but relatively fair treatment of his slaves compared to neighboring plantations like the brutal Blackwood estate, though Samuel knew that fair was a relative term when you were considered property rather than a person. The master's wife, Isabella, had died in childbirth 5 years earlier, leaving him to raise their daughter Charlotte alone with the help of Mammy Rose, an elderly house slave who had practically raised 3 generations of Whitmore children. Charlotte Whitmore was 22 years old, with auburn hair that caught the sunlight like spun copper, and green eyes that held an unusual warmth when she looked at the plantation workers. Unlike many plantation owners' daughters who were taught to view slaves as mere tools, she had never seemed comfortable with the institution of slavery. She often brought cool water to the field hands during the hottest summer days, spoke to them with a kindness that made the other white families whisper about her peculiar behavior, and had even been caught teaching some of the slave children their letters, a practice her father had strictly forbidden after discovering it. Samuel had noticed her watching him sometimes during his work, and he sensed something different about her, a restlessness, a questioning nature that seemed at odds with her privileged upbringing. There was an intelligence in her eyes that suggested she understood more about the injustices around her than she let on. But he was careful never to meet her gaze directly, knowing that such boldness could cost him dearly. The last slave who had been caught staring at a white woman had been sold to a chain gang, never to be seen again. The scorching afternoon. Sun beat down mercilessly on the cotton fields as Samuel worked alongside the other field hands, his shirt soaked with perspiration. The overseer, Jake Morrison, was a cruel man who took pleasure in wielding his whip, and today his temper was particularly foul. Samuel kept his head down and his movements steady, knowing that any sign of defiance or even fatigue could result in a brutal beating. It was during this oppressive heat that Charlotte decided to take her daily ride through the plantation grounds. She loved her mare, Duchess, a spirited chestnut horse that her father had given her for her 18th birthday. Charlotte often used these rides as an escape from the suffocating expectations of Southern womanhood. The endless embroidery lessons, the tedious social calls, and the constant pressure to find a suitable husband from among the neighboring plantation owners' sons. As Charlotte guided Duchess along the familiar path that bordered the cotton fields, she noticed the workers struggling under the brutal sun. Her heart ached, seeing their suffering, and despite her father's repeated warnings about maintaining proper distance from the slaves, she couldn't help but feel compelled to offer some relief. She had brought a large jug of cool water from the well, planning to distribute it among the workers when Morrison wasn't looking. But as Charlotte approached the edge of the field, disaster struck. A rattlesnake, disturbed by Duchess's hoofbeats, coiled and struck at the horse's front leg. Duchess reared up in terror and pain, throwing Charlotte from the saddle. She hit the ground hard, her head striking a large rock, and lay motionless as blood began to pool beneath her auburn hair. The field hands froze in horror, knowing that if the master's daughter died while they were nearby, they would all face terrible consequences. Morrison was at the far end of the field, unaware of what had happened. Samuel was the closest. To Charlotte, and without hesitation, he dropped his cotton sack and ran to her side. Kneeling beside her unconscious form, Samuel quickly assessed her injuries. The gash on her head was deep and bleeding profusely, and her breathing was shallow and irregular. He knew she needed immediate medical attention, but the nearest doctor was in town, more than an hour's ride away. Using the knowledge he had secretly gained from reading medical texts in Master Whitmore's library during his rare visits to the main house, Samuel began to treat her wounds. He tore strips from his own shirt to create makeshift bandages, carefully cleaning the wound with water from Charlotte's jug. He applied pressure to stop the bleeding while checking for signs of serious head trauma. Her pulse was weak, but steady, and her pupils responded to light, which gave him hope that the injury, while serious, might not be fatal. As Samuel worked to save Charlotte's life, he was acutely aware that he was crossing every boundary that existed between master and slave. He was touching a white woman, making medical decisions about her care, and taking charge of a situation that could easily be misinterpreted as an attack rather than a rescue. But looking at her pale face and feeling her weak pulse beneath his fingers, Samuel knew he couldn't let fear stop him from doing what was right. Other slaves began to gather around, whispering anxiously among themselves. Old Moses, the eldest field hand, approached Samuel with worry etched deep in his weathered face. "Boy, you better be careful," he warned in a low voice. "When Morrison sees this, he ain't gonna ask questions first. You know how these things go." Samuel nodded grimly, understanding the danger he was in, but he continued his careful ministrations. He had positioned Charlotte's head to prevent further injury, and was monitoring her breathing when she began to stir. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing confused green eyes that struggled to focus. "Don't try to move, Miss Charlotte," Samuel said softly, his voice gentle but firm. "You've had a bad fall. You hit your head pretty hard, and you need to stay still until we can get you proper help." Charlotte's eyes widened as she realized who was speaking to her. She had never heard Samuel speak before, and she was surprised by his articulate speech and the obvious intelligence in his words. Most of the field slaves spoke in the broken dialect that was expected of them, but Samuel's voice carried an education that shouldn't have been possible for someone in his position. You can speak like this," Charlotte whispered, her voice weak but filled with curiosity rather than accusation. Despite her injury and the dangerous situation, she found herself fascinated by this revelation. Samuel's eyes met hers for just a moment before he looked away, realizing his mistake. "I'm sorry, Miss Charlotte. I shouldn't have. I was just trying to help," Samuel replied, his voice now adopting the simpler speech patterns expected of him. But it was too late. Charlotte had heard his true voice, and she would not forget it. Before either of them could say more, The thundering sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of Jake Morrison. The overseer had finally noticed the commotion and was riding toward them with fury written across his face. Behind him came Master Whitmore himself, having been alerted by one of the house servants who had witnessed the accident from the main house. "Get away from her, you black devil!" Morrison shouted, dismounting his horse with his whip already in hand. "What have you done to Miss Charlotte?" Samuel immediately backed up. "More likely you spooked her horse on purpose. I've seen how you look at her, boy. You thought you could take advantage when she was alone." Master Whitmore dismounted and rushed to his daughter's side, his face pale with fear and rage. "Ah, Charlotte, my dear girl, what happened? Are you hurt badly?" Charlotte struggled to sit up, her head spinning from the movement. Father, please. Samuel saved my life. There was a snake. Duchess threw me. I was bleeding so much, and Samuel stopped it. He knew exactly what to do." But Master Whitmore was barely listening. His eyes were fixed on the blood-stained strips of cloth that Samuel had used as bandages, and his face was growing darker with each passing second. "You touched my daughter," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Sir." "She was dying," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the terror he felt. "The bleeding wouldn't stop. I had to help her, or she would have bled to death before anyone else could reach her." Morrison cracked his whip in the air, the sound making several of the gathered slaves flinch and step back. "That's enough lies from you. No slave has I the right to lay hands on a white woman, no matter what the excuse." "Wait," Charlotte said, her voice growing stronger as her head began to clear. "Father, you need to listen to me. Samuel didn't just help me, he saved my life. He knew things, medical things. He treated my wound like a real doctor would. How could a field slave know such things unless—" She trailed off, looking at Samuel with new understanding. The way he had examined her injuries, the confidence with which he had treated her wound, the educated speech she had heard, it all pointed to knowledge that no field slave should possess. Master Whitmore followed his daughter's gaze to Samuel, and for the first time he really looked at the young man who had worked his fields for years. He saw the intelligence in Samuel's eyes, the careful way he held himself, the obvious education that he had somehow acquired, despite every effort to prevent it. "Oh, you can read, can't you?" Master Whitmore said suddenly. It wasn't really a question, it was an accusation. Samuel knew there was no point in lying anymore. His secret was out, and denying it would only make things worse. "Yes, sir. I can read." The admission sent a ripple of shock through the gathered slaves. Reading was forbidden, punishable by severe beating or even death. But Samuel had just confessed to it openly, in front of the master himself. Morrison raised his whip again, but Master Whitmore held up a hand to stop him. "How?" he demanded. "How did you learn to read? Who taught you?" Samuel hesitated, knowing that his answer could implicate others. But Mrs. Hayes had been dead for 3 years now, and he saw no reason to protect her memory by lying. "Mrs. Hayes, sir, the old overseer's wife. She taught me when I was young." Master Whitmore's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. He had known Eleanor Hayes, and while he had disapproved of her northern sensibilities, he had respected her intelligence and kindness. "And you used this education to save my daughter's life," he said slowly, as if trying to process the implications. "I did what anyone would do, sir. I couldn't let her die when I had the knowledge to help her." Charlotte struggled to her feet, swaying slightly but determined to stand. "Father, don't you see? Samuel risked everything to save me. He knew that touching me, helping me, could cost him his life. But he did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. How can we punish someone for that kind of courage and compassion?" Master Whitmore looked at his daughter, seeing the conviction in her eyes and the obvious gratitude she felt towards Samuel. He looked at the makeshift bandages that had undoubtedly saved her life, and at the young man who had risked everything to help her. For the first time in his life, Jonathan Whitmore found himself questioning the very foundations of the world. He had always known. The other slaves watched in tense silence, knowing that Samuel's fate, and possibly their own, hung in the balance of this moment. Morrison stood ready with his whip, waiting for the order to deliver the punishment that everyone expected, but that order never came. Instead, Master Whitmore did something that shocked everyone present. He extended his hand toward Samuel, not in friendship, but in a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended the usual boundaries between master and slave. "You saved my daughter's life," Master Whitmore said, his voice heavy with emotion. He rarely allowed himself to show that debt cannot be ignored, regardless of other considerations. Morrison's face twisted with disbelief and rage. "Sir, you can't be serious. He's still a slave who overstepped his bounds. If word gets out that we're rewarding this kind of behavior, every slave in the county will think they can—" "Enough!" Master Whitmore's voice cut through Morrison's protest like a blade. "My daughter is alive because of this man's actions. That is the only fact that matters to me right now." Over the following weeks, everything changed at Magnolia Grove. Plantation. Samuel was moved from the fields to work in the main house, officially as a general laborer, but in reality serving as Charlotte's personal protector and companion. Master Whitmore had made it clear that Samuel was under his direct protection, and Morrison was forbidden from laying a hand on him. Charlotte's recovery was slow but steady, and during this time, she and Samuel began to develop a relationship that defied every social convention of their era. What started as gratitude on her part and careful respect on his gradually deepened into something neither of them had expected: genuine friendship and eventually love. Their conversations began innocently enough. Charlotte would ask Samuel about the books he had read, amazed by his knowledge of literature, history, and medicine. Samuel, initially cautious about revealing too much of his education, gradually opened up as he realized that Charlotte genuinely valued his intelligence and opinions. "I've read Hamlet 17 times, Samuel confessed one afternoon as they sat in the garden behind the main house, Charlotte sketching while he tended to the roses. "Each time, I discover something new about the human condition." Charlotte looked up from her drawing, her eyes bright with interest. "What do you think of Hamlet's indecision? Do you see it as weakness or wisdom?" "I think," Samuel said carefully, "that Hamlet understood the weight of irreversible actions. When you're powerless, as he was in many ways, you learn to think carefully before you act. One wrong move can destroy not just yourself, but everyone you care about." Charlotte set down her pencil, recognizing the deeper meaning in his words. "You're not just talking about Hamlet, are you?" Samuel met her gaze, and for a moment the barriers between them seemed to dissolve completely. "No, Miss Charlotte, I'm not." As autumn turned to winter, their relationship continued to deepen. Charlotte began to see the world through Samuel's eyes, understanding for the first time the daily humiliations and fears that defined life for enslaved people. Samuel, meanwhile, discovered in Charlotte a kindred spirit, someone who questioned the injustices around her and genuinely cared about making things better. But their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Morrison watched them with increasing suspicion and resentment, waiting for an opportunity to expose what he saw as an inappropriate relationship. The other slaves whispered among themselves, some worried about the danger Samuel was courting, others hopeful that his elevated status might somehow benefit them all. The crisis came in December, when Charlotte's cousin, Robert Blackwood, arrived for an extended visit. Robert was everything that Samuel was not: wealthy, white, and entitled. He was also cruel, having inherited the worst traits of the Blackwood family, known throughout the county for their brutal treatment. of slaves. Robert had come with the intention of courting Charlotte, encouraged by Master Whitmore, who saw the match as advantageous for both families. But Robert quickly became suspicious of the relationship between Charlotte and Samuel, and his suspicions turned to rage when he witnessed a moment of tenderness between them. It happened on a cold December evening. Charlotte had been reading in the library when she fell asleep in her chair. Samuel, bringing her a shawl as he had been instructed to do, gently covered her shoulders. As he did so, Charlotte stirred and smiled up at him, her hand briefly touching his in a gesture of affection that was unmistakably intimate. Robert, who'd been watching from the doorway, exploded into the room. "How dare you!" he shouted, in his face red with fury. "You filthy animal! Get your hands off her!" And Charlotte jerked awake, immediately understanding the danger of the situation. "Robert, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Robert snarled, advancing on Samuel with his fists clenched. "This slave has been taking liberties with you, and your father has been too blind to see it." Samuel stepped back, his hands raised peacefully. "Sir, I meant no disrespect. I was simply following Miss Charlotte's instructions to—" Robert's fist connected with Samuel's jaw, sending him staggering backward. "Don't you dare speak to me, you piece of property!" Charlotte leaped to her feet, placing herself between Robert and Samuel. "Stop this immediately. Samuel has done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" Robert laughed harshly. "Charlotte, you've been bewitched by this slave. Can't you see how inappropriate this is? What will people say when they learn that Jonathan Whitmore's daughter has been consorting with her father's property?" The confrontation brought Master Whitmore running, and when he saw the scene, his daughter defending Samuel against his nephew's accusations, he realized that the situation had spiraled far beyond what he had intended when he first showed Samuel mercy. The tension in the library was suffocating as Master Whitmore surveyed the scene before him. His daughter stood protectively in front of Samuel, whose jaw was already swelling from Robert's blow. Robert himself was practically vibrating with rage, his face flushed and his fists still clenched. "What exactly is going on here?" Master Whitmore demanded, though the sinking feeling in his stomach suggested he already knew. Robert stepped forward eagerly, seeing his chance to expose what he viewed as a scandal. "Uncle Jonathan, I caught this slave touching Charlotte inappropriately. They were intimate. It's clear that this situation has gone far beyond what's proper or safe." Master Whitmore's eyes moved from Robert to Charlotte to Samuel, reading the truth in their faces. Charlotte's protective stance, Samuel's resigned acceptance of his fate, and the obvious affection between them told him everything he needed to know. "Charlotte," he said quietly, "is this true? Have you developed feelings for Samuel?" Charlotte lifted her chin defiantly, her green eyes blazing with determination. "Yes, Father, I love him, and he loves me. I know it's not what you want to hear, but it's the truth." The admission hit the room like a thunderclap. Robert gasped in shock and disgust, while Master Whitmore seemed to age 10 years in an instant. Samuel closed his eyes, knowing that Charlotte's honesty, while brave, had likely sealed both their fates. "This is madness," Robert exploded. "Charlotte, you can't possibly mean what you're saying. He's a slave. He's property. You might as well say you love a horse or a piece of furniture." "He's a man," Charlotte replied firmly. "A good, intelligent, compassionate man who saved my life and has shown me more kindness and understanding than any of the so-called gentlemen. You would have me marry—" Master Whitmore sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "Well, Charlotte, you don't understand what you're saying. The implications, the scandal. It would destroy our family's reputation. No one would ever accept such a union." "Then we'll go somewhere where they will," Charlotte said simply. "Samuel and I have talked about this. We know the challenges we would face, but we're willing to face them together." Samuel finally spoke, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Sir, I never intended for this to happen. I know the position it puts you in, and I know the danger it creates for everyone. If you want me to leave, to disappear, I'll do it. But I won't pretend that I don't love your daughter, because I do, more than my own life." Robert laughed bitterly. Listen to him. He actually thinks his feelings matter. Uncle Jonathan, you have to end this madness now. Sell him to the chain gangs, or better yet, have him whipped to death as an example to the others. "No!" Charlotte cried out, moving even closer to Samuel. "Father, if you harm him, you'll lose me forever. I swear it." Master Whitmore looked up at his daughter, seeing the absolute conviction in her eyes. He realized that she wasn't making an idle threat. She meant every word. If he destroyed Samuel, he would lose Charlotte as well, and she was all he had left in the world. For long minutes, the room was silent, except for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Master Whitmore wrestled with a decision that would change everything, not just for his family, but for his understanding of right and wrong. Finally, he stood up and walked to his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and a pen. "Samuel," he said quietly, "come here." Samuel approached, cautiously unsure what to expect. Master Whitmore began to write, his hand steady despite the magnitude of what he was doing. "I, Jonathan Whitmore, do hereby grant full freedom to the man known as Samuel in recognition of his service to my family and his demonstrated character and intelligence," he read aloud as he wrote. "Furthermore, I acknowledge his right to marry my daughter Charlotte, should she choose to accept his proposal, and I grant them both my blessing and a portion of my estate to begin their new life together." Robert stared in shock. "Uncle Jonathan, you can't be serious. This is social suicide. The entire county will turn against you." Master Whitmore signed the document with a flourish and handed it to Samuel. "Perhaps they will. But I've spent my whole life believing in a system that would have let my daughter die, rather than allow a good man to save her because of the color of his skin. I'm tired of living by rules that make no sense when measured against basic human decency." Samuel stared at the document, in his hands, hardly able to believe what he was reading. After 25 years of bondage, he was free. More than that, he was being given the chance to marry the woman he loved with her father's blessing. Charlotte threw her arms around both men, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Father. Thank you for seeing what I see in him." Master Whitmore embraced his daughter, then extended his hand to Samuel, not as master to slave, but as father to future son-in-law. "Welcome to the family, Samuel. I pray that you'll make Charlotte as happy as she deserves to be." 6 months later, Samuel and Charlotte were married in a small ceremony attended by the few friends and family members who could accept their union. They moved to a farm in Pennsylvania, where Samuel's intelligence and Charlotte's determination helped them build a successful life together. Their story became legend in the county. The slave who became a free man through courage and love, and the plantation owner's daughter who chose love over social convention. It was a testament to the power of human dignity to triumph over even the most entrenched systems of oppression.